I am Corrine Gursky, and I work at Stripe. I lead the strategic customer success team at Stripe, and I've been here for about 3.5 years. And over that time, I've become a raving fan of playbooks. So today I'm going to talk a little bit about playbooks and how we use them in our business to try to drive really kind of strong consistency and repeatable outcomes for those things that are repeat motions in our customer success world. This is the weirdest venue. I like it. I understand that the things come out. You can take a nap if it's not interesting. We'll see here. All right. Okay, so before I dive into the nuts and bolts of my presentation, I want to start with a little bit about how I became a raving fan of playbooks. As my colleague mentioned, what our business at Stripe is a consumption business. I think if you saw my colleague Megan's presentation yesterday, she spoke a little bit about that. As opposed to a typical SaaS model where you'll have a lengthy sort of contract, year contract, multi-year contract, and you focus on sort of driving utilization. In a consumption-based business, the moment that the customer stops doing a transaction, you stop making money. So this is true for many businesses. And what it's not that it's harder, it's just that it's different, and the criticality of having real-time signals to try to spot issues and sort of spot what's happening before there's an issue becomes just pretty intense. I saw this quote actually on the back of a book that my husband was reading on his bedside. It says, "Every catastrophe begins with a little problem that doesn't get fixed." It's funny, I saw that, I'm like, oh yeah, that's the job of a CSM. That's exactly what we do. And so our goal, and sort of what we strive to do, is try to spot the kinds of things that happen, like what do things look like before there's a problem, to try to proactively avoid a problem. If there is a problem, how do you squash it really quickly? And how do we drive sort of that consistency of what we know to be true? How do we repeat that? If we know a certain motion solves a certain problem, how do we make sure the whole team sort of knows that motion and knows how to execute with a really sort of high level of consistency and a really strong outcome? So these are the kinds of things we think about. And it's just very difficult to do at scale. And so we found, it all started with renewals. A couple years ago when I got to Stripe, we were starting a big renewal, and I was new to the business. I'm like, well, how do we do a renewal in payments? Like, what did Stripe do? And there was no document. There was nothing to read. It was like people just sort of created the process on their own. And so someone on the team's like, well, we need a playbook for that. And sort of that was the start of my love affair with playbooks. So for starters, does anyone not use playbooks in their business? Is this a relatively new concept, or is anyone? Okay, so everyone has some level of, okay, I saw some hands. So to level set, a playbook is quite simply just a list of instructions, a set of to-dos that should, if you do them in the proper order, in the proper way, should lead to a really predictable and strong outcome. So this is a beautiful thing. It's kind of like a recipe if you cook. If you're in sports, a playbook for a certain sort of series of moves. But the beautiful thing about it is it really standardizes sort of what you do as a team. It allows you to incorporate best practices. So if something worked really well, well, then you add it into the playbook. So playbooks for us, typically a doc, a really clear sort of set of instructions. You add the best practices in there. If something didn't work well, then you could add the watch out. And over time, your playbook just continues to get stronger and stronger as you learn collectively across the team what works well and what doesn't. One other thing about playbooks is that it really drives efficiency and leverage. So what I mean by this is, if there's a published playbook, a CSM doesn't have to spend time figuring out how to do something. You can just start with the best practice, and then you can customize from there. It also helps you sort of promulgate really good ideas across remote and global teams. So this is something we've struggled with generally. We have teams in APAC, and EMEA, and LATAM, and we find that a lot of times people are doing kind of different things in different regions, but when we go back to these playbooks and we publish them, it makes it much easier for people to understand what the best practice is. Of course you customize, but at least it gives you sort of an anchor place to start. And if you do this, hopefully the outcomes, again, are strengthened, and you have a sense of what sorts of things will lead to what sorts of outcomes that you can really count on over time. Okay, so the goal for today's session is I'm going to get a little tactical. I don't know about you, but when I attend conferences, I get a ton of energy. I hear speakers, I hear great ideas, my head starts swimming, and I get kind of pumped up. And then something happens, but when I leave the room and the speaker's over, and I kind of move on and I go back to my desk, it's difficult for me to translate these big concepts into something on my to-do list. So this happens to me at offsites too. I'm actually one of those people that I love a good offsite, but I also find that not a ton changes from most of these sorts of events. So today, what I hope to do is to get a little tactical so that maybe if you're taking notes, you'll have like a to-do or an idea or something you can actually try to execute on to connect some of the thought leadership with actual more sort of down-to-earth sort of like tactical things. Brings me to where to start. Okay, so when we started thinking about these playbooks for our business, I did mention it all started with the concept of a playbook for our renewal, a really standard motion. We thought, well, what kinds of things do we need to, like, what are the repeat motions? What are the kinds of things that like need a playbook? I would recommend you start with your mission statement. All businesses have a mission statement. Most departments do as well. Like for Stripe, our customer success department has a mission of ensuring that our customers derive the maximum value out of their Stripe investments. So what does that mean? It means that the money that they spend with Stripe, hopefully they perceive it to be money really well spent, that it's efficient, it commands a strong ROI, and then our hypothesis is that if we do these things, if they perceive the value of their investment is really strong, then we'll probably have a very strong renewal outcome and it'll help us retain customers. So start with your mission statement. In fact, like a lot of the work we do always comes back to that. Like, does this like help us demonstrate better value to the customer? And then consider what's worked in your business. What are repeat motions? What's worked? What hasn't worked? And you kind of make a list of these sorts of things. So like what kinds of things would really be served well by a playbook? And then think about, well, what needs to be true in order to have this playbook be effective? So one example, I don't know if this has ever happened to you, but as an example of what you might want a playbook is you work with a customer, you have this wonderful interaction and series of interactions with your main point of contact, and your boss asks, so how are things going with the customer? What do you think the relationship status is? And you say green. Status is green. Everything's great. And then like 6 weeks later, there's a renewal that comes up, and the customer doesn't want to renew or won't renew at the same level or same level of commitment. And you think, like, well, how did that happen? What signals did I miss that made it so that I didn't have a good understanding of where I stood and where our company stood with the customer? And that is like a perfect situation for a playbook. It's like signals. It's like, what could we do to make sure that that doesn't happen again? Okay, so these are motions and situations in our business to give you some examples of things that are really right for playbooks. And we actually have a playbook for each of these things that I'll go into in a minute. So the first one I just mentioned is like when you're missing signals, where maybe you're a little single-threaded, you're missing signals across a wide range of people to have that broad and deep understanding of like what are the inputs into the decision-making process and who has say in your relationship. The second one would be optimization. This would be like, is your customer using your products in an optimal way? Are they efficient? Is it easy? Do they find it a strong value? Generally, that's another area where you could put a playbook. A third thing would be developing a really strong feedback loop. We find that just because in Q1 things are going great, trending really matters, and you don't know like over time, like how do you get the inputs and the signals to understand if you are really sort of maintaining that high level of relationship, that sort of green status of relationship. And the last one, I don't know if this has happened to you, but sometimes you do really great work and somehow the customer just doesn't realize it. There's a playbook for that. I'll walk you through it, but there was a situation where we just realized we weren't loud enough about the good work we were doing, and so it like really like needed a playbook. Okay. So this brings me to our first playbook. We call it the Proactive Listening Tour. This playbook I don't know if you guys recognize that guy from I Dream of Jeannie, but I thought that picture was funny. This playbook started during a renewal. This is the genesis of this, where we were really stuck. It was a really large customer, and we were trying to negotiate this renewal, and we realized we actually had no idea of what they cared about. We had a single point of contact that was a head of payments. It's very common in our payments industry, and he was pretty opaque, didn't give us a lot of signal, and we just didn't have a lot of other relationships to lean on, and we just realized we were flying blind. And so as we were brainstorming this renewal, someone said, we just need to talk to like a dozen people and get all different kinds of perspectives of how the different groups work together at the company to understand what they care about. And then, of course, because it's Stripe, someone said, how about 24? Because that's what we do, is we try to like raise the bar. And so that kicked off a process where the CSM decided to proactively go and talk to so many people and really gain insights as to how the company was all connected, how different departments touch the customer, and what matters. Now, this proactive listening tour, we actually call it the PLT. I recommend you give your playbooks fun names, because somehow it's like becomes a thing. It's sort of like the connection between that concept of how do we be proactive as CSMs to avoid problems. Well, this would be an actual tangible example of the kind of thing that you could do to be proactive. So step one is like do your homework. You, as a CSM, you look at everything that is publicly available, podcast, 10K, maybe you read news sort of releases from a newsroom, and sort of you figure out like at the company level, what is the company working on? What are they talking about? What's important? And then you make a list of all the people that you think you need to talk to and go really broad here. This would be maybe the head of payments is the one who really is like the primary point of contact for our business, but finance probably has to sign the check. Maybe sales cares because if payments aren't working, then you're not selling. Marketing might care because if we add a new payment method, maybe they could do some marketing around that. So you realize that there's actually a really wide sort of breadth of folks that might have some influence on the decision-making process. So you make your list, you set up your calls, prep your questions in advance so you have really good interview questions, and then go start the tour. Usually this takes a quarter for us, could be less, and this really could scale depending on how many customers are in your portfolio. If you manage 50 customers, well, you can't do this like in a deep way, but maybe you do 5 or 6. If you only manage 1 or 2 customers, you could go really deep on this. And after you are meeting with people, you're taking notes, and then the last step is actually turn what you learn into some actionable thing. So synthesize your notes, look for themes, try to understand like what is actually, what's actually important to the customer, and then feed that into the account strategy and the renewal strategy, and so forth. That's the PLT. Okay, playbook number 2. This is what we call the optimization roadmap and ties directly into our mission, where we look at all of the things that are like optimizable in the way that we work with the customer. And then we work with the customer to understand what do they care about. Hopefully we have a good list from the PLT that we just did. But then you might learn some new things through talking directly with the customer in a QBR or other executive sort of conversation. And then do a proposal. And this is one of those things where it's one thing if you just do an optimization. It's another if you make it a big deal and put a package around it so it feels, it's like, that concept of thud, where it really feels like you're doing something. Make a nice visual on a slide. Say, these are the things we're going to optimize on this kind of timeline. So you really have a good calendar of ideas. And then start the work. Do an optimization, work with your customer, and then track and measure what you've done so that you keep a running list and you make sure you tell them about it after you're complete. So at the end of the 6-month period, you can say, oh, we've done these 5 optimizations and we've saved you this much, or we've grown your revenue by this much. It's a really powerful thing to have and data to have as you head into a renewal. Okay, playbook number 3. This is what we call the performance scorecard. Some people call it a vendor scorecard. You've probably interacted with some version of this. We tweaked it a little. because we found that different people were doing this in different ways, we decided that we didn't want to just do a vendor scorecard. We wanted to come up with something where we could solicit feedback, usually quarterly or tying with a QBR, where we solicit inputs from our customer on a regular basis to understand how we're trending over time. So it could be in Q1 things are going well, and then Q2 we see a dip in something. So in addition to normal KPIs that folks will measure, for us in payments it's like, authorization rates, latency, security, reliability. Those are kind of standard things that would go into a vendor scorecard. But we actually built a template that recommends we also measure and track thought leadership, global expansion, relationship management. So we try to make it not just sort of the KPIs, but also like a holistic relationship assessment. I really like this because sometimes I find customers are reluctant to share like bad news. People don't like it. It's really uncomfortable. But if you're asking for, say, hey, we need a report card. You need to fill this thing out for us, and we will take action when you give us really good feedback. It's sort of like CSAT, but goes like deeper because you have a long conversation about it. We find this is really effective, and it actually gives us the ideas of the things we need to feed into that optimization roadmap. So over time, you can learn what's going well, what's not, and then fix what's not. So see what I did there? I connected the playbooks. So pretty soon you could have a playbook for how to connect the playbooks. Okay, last one I'll review. This is the user snapshot. This was like a painful. This was a painful one. The reason that we have this is because harking back to something I said before, where we were doing all this cool work and people weren't remembering or noticing. We were in the middle of a renewal with a large customer, and we thought we were in such a strong position. We had just worked with this customer over the prior quarter to implement optimizations that were going to save the customer $1 million a month, a very meaningful percentage of the overall spend on payments. And like $12 million a year in savings for some work that we recommended, we thought that clearly we showed our value as a partner and that we were going to probably have a pretty amicable renewal. And then we didn't. In fact, it was horrible. And we said, but what about all this stuff we did? Doesn't that get us any credit? And the VP of Finance is like, I didn't even know about that. And so first of all, okay, I was in the room when we told him. So this also leads me to an ancillary point that just because someone's in the room when you say something doesn't mean they're listening. So it was a QBR. I'm sure he was multitasking. And so what we realized was that if you want customers to really hear your message and really understand the value of the work that you're doing, you need to say it kind of a lot. You need to slip it in QBRs, in executive communications, through regular email communications. So this is one of the things we built so that it's an easy template. Every CSM can do this. And so the steps here for this particular exercise is that the CSM would work with their main point of contact to decide sort of what to report on. Usually for us, it's like highs for the month or the quarter, lows and work streams, and the status of those work streams and who's on tap for doing what. So it's actually pretty short, but it does more than just communicate things. The way we use this is, number one, it's like a way for the CSM to ensure that they're fully aligned with their main point of contact, that we're working on the right things, that we're capturing all the key things, and that we're putting together and publicly all the stuff that we're doing together. That's valuable just in and of itself. It also is a really interesting opportunity for our main contacts to shine in front of their leadership. Because usually we would send this to some executives, probably a couple levels up from our main contacts. And if we do this right, usually we would draft something and then have our main points of contact look at it and make sure that they like what we're portraying. It gives an opportunity to make them shine and highlight their good work that they're doing as well. And then lastly, we might send this, but normally what we'll also do if there's anything particularly cool in there, like for example that $1 million a month savings that apparently went unnoticed, we can send copy your account sponsor, send a copy over and say, hey, will you forward this to your contact and point out this little thing, draft a little note. So it's just one of many ways I would hope to communicate really good news or things about the relationship. But we found this template to be a particularly effective, again, to really proactively actively communicate, which is something we all strive to do to like avoid those issues. It's like, here's what we're working on, and here's why it's valuable, and make sure you hear about it. Okay, so those are our playbooks. So if you want to try one of these things, again, maybe one of these 4 like speak to you, and they're motions that you need in your business too, so you can just sort of try it out. And if not, look at your mission statement. Go back to that. Go back to what is it you're trying to do, and what are the things you need to do to get there that everyone should be working on. Build a list of what needs to be true in order for you to have those really strong outcomes that you're hoping for in your business. And then again, just pick one. Try it. I've found it's incredibly efficient and effective to manage and scaling a CS organization. That's it. Right. I think we have time for questions. Yeah.
Very cool. I like the playbook context, so that's good to know, and I might have to pick your brain on some of those for future implementation. My role, because some of the things we talked about on the side here about consumption business really applies. So with that, we'll open up to questions. We actually have one up there, so we'll run to the microphone. Today I don't get to run up the stairs. We have somebody do that. And I'll take care of it down here.
Hi, that was a great presentation. Thanks so much. For the user snapshot playbook, I love that because it's definitely important. Just because you say something doesn't mean that people hear it. I'm wondering, how often would you run that playbook? How often are you kind of funneling that information to the executives?
Yeah. So let's say it depends. If you have like in some of our relationships, we might have one CSM on the entire relationship, and it's massive, and we're like 12 to 14 different work streams going on at any one moment with the customer. For those kinds of relationships, monthly has been a really helpful cadence for the snapshot. Not necessarily sending it sort of on the side to the executives, but at least including the executive on the initial distribution. If you have smaller relationships that are doing fewer things, a handful of work streams valuable, I could see where a quarterly snapshot would be really good. But this is one of those things where you, again, like put a package around it. The CSM could talk to their main point of contact and say, hey, I'm thinking of doing this. I think it's going to help us stay aligned, make sure our our respective companies understand what each other are working on. What do you think? It may be like that kind of thing. It does take work, so I would always err on the side of like less, not more, because you don't want to commit something and then you're stuck doing something monthly. And you could even say ad hoc. You could even say I think it's a time to do it now. So I find that quarterly is probably the best for most large relationships at a minimum. Thank you. Yeah.
Hi. Have you ever, let's say, lost a renewal and your CSM applied all of the best practice, all of it in the playbook? Have you ever gone back and audited if a step was skipped, or what did that account miss or the CSM miss, and then replicate further so you could see, okay, this seems to be a mission critical step that everybody forgets?
Yes. Yes, of course. I would say that that I view these playbooks generally as sort of live documents over time, and we're continually adding tweaks, like best practices, and more importantly, watch outs. And so I find that's they do evolve, and we incorporate things. Usually a giant renewal that's lost is a series of many things that didn't work well. But I would say that each one of these playbooks was a result probably of something not going as well as we wanted, or in some cases, I guess, just because something went well. But mostly, unfortunately, it's something didn't go well, and let's put a wrapper around that and make sure it's very clear how to execute so we don't have that thing happen again. So yes, I guess, but I would tweak them over time, absolutely.
From the time before you implemented a program like this, did you do a before and after? Before we lost X amount of revenue, but after the playbook, let's say 1 year, 1, 2, we could see that we closed that gap.
Yeah, well, I will say we're a new department at Stripe. We stood up the CS org roughly a year and a half ago. So I feel like we're at the point where that's probably becoming a more relevant exercise, but these are all playbooks we've developed over the last year. So I don't know that we've had the reps to be able to do that yet, but certainly on our mind to track and monitor like what's working and what's not. Like everyone, I think a lot of things were discussed yesterday. Data and tracking is like the challenge for all of us. But yes, I mean, I would be a strong recommendation if it were possible. Yeah.
Great, thanks.
Yeah.
Hi. So yesterday we talked a little bit about like failures and sharing failures and things like that. Have you come across a situation where you've implemented a playbook and it was not well received and it did not generate any type of outcome that you were expecting?
Yeah, we have, I would say we have a playbook around CSAT scores in our CSAT program, and it's great, but I think one thing I would say is that in isolation would have been amazing. But one thing you do have to keep in mind is that when you set up all these motions, that sometimes we risk overwhelming our customers, and so we do like RSAT scores for the technical support. We do CSAT scores for our CSMs and overall relationship management. For some customers, we're doing the user snapshot. We do the scorecard, and we have definitely had times where our customers like, okay, you have to stop asking us for feedback. We're huge on feedback at the company, just generally. It's just like baked into who we are and sort of our DNA. So I would say one fail would be that when we implemented, like we just rolled out our first CSAT program and we're like, this is great, everyone loved it. But then it was like the tipping point to like too much feedback. And so nothing about that particular playbook, but just paired with all the others might have been overkill. So definitely, it's always good to zoom out periodically and understand when you're building your account strategy of like, how are we touching the customer? What are the motions what playbooks are we gonna run in what periods to make sure that you're like not overwhelming any one individual, which is like what we did with our last cycle. So yeah. I also overwhelm my family sometimes with playbooks. I think I've just sort of I just love efficiency, right? We went on a trip. I'm like, we need a playbook for family travel. So like, here's who does what, and here's how we do it, and the time frame, and like enough already. Yeah.
That land, Kareen. Right here.
Oh,
hey.
Hi. Yeah.
Huge fan of playbooks. Just a question around PLT. See, it's already catching on.
That just warms my heart to hear you say that. It's going to be an industry thing before we know it.
It's awesome.
Yeah.
My question was more regarding scaling these playbooks and specifically some thinking around tooling as you think about all these different signals that the CSM is getting, which is such great input for other teams to get. Have you landed on a tool, or are you guys thinking about that? Because it helps develop so much great pattern recognition as well as you can just look at great historical data of how your white glove customers are doing versus others, et cetera, and over time. And that's incredibly hard to do, any sort of a manual setup. So just wondering some thinking around that as you scale across.
Yeah, that is on our mind. And in fact, you were sitting directly next to the person who's in charge of building that tooling for us. So your positioning there is just perfect. I will say Megan has built an amazing initial sort of health dashboard for us where we both in automated ways pull in data about usage and the different components of the product that customers are using, as well as the CSAT scores, as well as these playbooks that we're running, and tracking frequency and effectiveness. So all of that's being built into visuals and a nice dashboard for us. But at the moment, that's what she's building. So, yes. Yeah. All right, I think we have time maybe for one more, if there's any more.
Actually, kick off with a question for you. So playbooks are good because I live with those, but there's a level of automation that's entering even that level of conversation. Do you feel like the playbooks and the numbers or sequence are going to get automated with AI and ML on the back end that does not require that? It's just automatically gathering the metrics from the systems and saying, hey, these checkboxes or feedback has already been received. Do you have any thought on that?
Yeah, I mean, so the world that we live in, and that I live in, is the sort of like the larger customer side where everything's sort of bespoke and very uniquely done. So I don't have that risk today so much of like in my space, but as we build out our CS program at scale, I think there's a lot of things that could actually be automated that would be really beneficial and could give the CSMs leverage. User snapshot would be a perfect one. If, let's say, all of our work streams lived in a system, the system could feed updates into a nice snapshot. Maybe performance metrics could also be fed right into a scorecard, and then people could just sort of tweak around the edges and add more subjective comments into these tools. I think that would actually give people a lot of leverage. So I don't think it would make the CSM roles obsolete. I just think it would give them more leverage so they could take on like larger portfolio of accounts, and it would be slightly less frustrating to try to pull all this stuff together manually. So that's a great question.
Very cool. Any more questions? No? Looks good. Well, thank you very much,